let's now put the focus on the top story. We are tracking here on Startup Central. Foxconn reportedly has asked hundreds of Chinese engineers and technicians that are working in India's factories to return home. Foxconn, remember, is a Taiwanese electronics giant and a key Apple supplier. China's actions coincide with India's efforts to expand high-tech manufacturing in the electronics and EV segments. And that's essentially coming in under the PLI scheme and, of course, the Make in India initiative. Now, these moves happen even as United States tariffs, they threaten to disrupt supply chains. So what does this really mean for India's ambitions to become the next global manufacturing hub? And is this China's ploy to sabotage supply chains in the country? Well, we break it down with exclusive insights on what this move could mean for India's manufacturing economy and its future. We're now joined by Navkinder Singh, devices analyst, IDC Asia Pacific. He's joining us live on the broadcast. Thank you very much, Navkinder, for joining us here on ET. Now, let me ask you up front. I mean, earlier it was specialty fertilizers. Then, of course, we saw some disruption coming in on rare earths and now electronics. Even though China has stated that there were technical reasons, especially as far as the rare earth matter is concerned. But how are you looking at these moves? Are these moves just about technicalities that China seems to be claiming?
Thank you, Sumita, for having me on the show. So as you said, it started with some of the other categories, and now it has gone to the high-tech manufacturing like, Apple. I don't think this is, specifically on the technicalities. This is a very strategic ploy to actually disrupt the supply chain. And we have to understand why that's happening, because while India has made a lot of inroads in the past 4 or 5 years with the PLI scheme and everything, and Apple has benefited a lot, and Indian manufacturing has benefited a lot. Apple is producing a lot of phones from India now and exporting as well. But this is just a China plus one. Dependency on China still remains. Obviously, the geopolitics tension, everything, India, China, USA, all the things which are happening, China would like to keep the dependency of Apple and all the other manufacturing and other industries also to China. So I think it's a very strategic ploy. We are entering a very new era. Beyond the trade wars, this is a supply chain disruption which is happening, because if the components, if the expertise, if the shop floor expertise is disrupted, obviously it delays a lot of advancements in the manufacturing which can happen. It might not be clear to us in the short term, but in the mid and the longer term, this is not a good sign for India's manufacturing capability, at least in the electronic space.
Okay, so let me take that point forward and, of course, expand a bit more on that. How much of a bearing will this move have on Apple's manufacturing plans in the country, given that Foxconn is a major supplier? And Navkinder, we've heard from both Apple and Foxconn, they're looking at deepening investments into the Indian manufacturing ecosystem. So how much of a disruption is this going to cause in the short term? Is this too much of a worry for India's manufacturing ambitions, particularly with respect to the electronics segment?
It is a worry, but we should not be very worried, for the near term, or at least Apple should not be worried for the near term. We have to understand all these engineers. This is a part of the talent and the knowledge transfer which happens. So whenever Foxconn or some of the other suppliers or manufacturing in India, they have to expand the assembly line. So let's say right now Apple is producing a little short of 20% of their global production is being assembled in China. Assembled in India. This has to go to about 30-35%, and that's the intent they've shown in the past 4 or 5 months also. That means from about 40 million units which are being produced right now in India or assembled in India, it has to go to about 70-80 million. Now, what that means is when the expansion of all the assembly lines happens and the components have to start coming in, many of the engineers from Foxconn and China, they come here, they train the people, they work on the shop floor. This is just a knowledge transfer which happens. So this is a spanner in that, not in the immediate term, not possibly in the production of iPhone 17, possibly. Right now, we should not see, for the next 5-6 months, there'll be any disruption in the production levels for Apple. But going forward, how does India become a meaningful player? Because if it reaches about 30-35%, that's about 1/3 of Apple's total capacity will be based in India. China doesn't like it. Apple would love to have China plus one, and India is ripe for that. So that's what we have to see in that. That in the mid and the long term, this is a worry.
In the mid and the longer term, this could be a worry given the fact that China would want to disrupt India's manufacturing ambitions. Of course, like you rightly stated, Navkinder, Apple has reportedly committed to shifting at least 25% of its production to India. That could also go up to 30%. And of course, there is interest from other electronics companies as well. So definitely China is looking at attacking into that. And let me expand a bit more on the impact analysis. In fact, Union IT Minister Ashwini Vaishnaw, while speaking with ET, has reportedly stated, and I quote, that India is developing its own capabilities in electronics manufacturing in a very methodical and sustained way and is poised to achieve its value addition target of 38% within the next few years. He's also said, and I quote, and of course we have the graphics up on screen, de-risking is learning the skills and making it here and developing our own supply chains. And this is essentially what we are doing. He also said that support is coming to the electronics manufacturing ecosystem from countries like Taiwan, the United States, and of course South Korea. So, Navkinder, that also needs to be kept in mind, the fact that India is not just manufacturing, but it is also building its local supply chains. It's also expanding its local components ecosystem. And in that context, when the minister spoke with ET and said that, we are getting support from China, Taiwan, the United States, and South Korea, there is nothing much to worry about.
I would, like to disagree there. I mean, obviously, these are great intent, noble intent. We should be developing, and I'm sure the government is doing something, around those lines. But I think de-risking and decoupling from China, at least the companies like Apple, and even the electronic ecosystem in terms of high-tech manufacturing, like, for example, the chipsets 5 nanometer and below, and high-tech, 1,000 plus ASP phones and other laptops and other. I think a lot of dependency of the value chain, global value chain, still remains on China. Well, we estimate that's not going to go down. We have to work with China in that. We cannot be independent, and we have to go back that how Apple developed in the past 30 years, dependency on China and China. And they did a lot of knowledge transfer. They skilled a lot of people, about 25, 30 million people, according to some reports, in India, in China. So I think that kind of skilling, it's not only about the component manufacturing, it's about skilling high-tech workforce, which is dependable at the cost which these companies want. This will take time. Silicon production also in India will take time. All of this will take time. But I think in the near term, I would say this is still 5 to 10 years kind of away. But I'm sure, India is taking a lot of logical and necessary steps to actually be a meaningful player in the export manufacturing, manufacturing and export both.
Right, Navkinder, but do you anticipate more of such curbs coming from China after the recent ones?
We do actually, and this will not be, as it started, not in the electronics. Electronics is obviously the high ticket item, and in the exports also, it's it's a meaningful share. But for example, pharma, for example, in fertilizer, it's already there. Pharma is very dependent on that. But we see more of this coming in because this is not a knee-jerk reaction which has happened, calling so many engineers at one go. This will only increase. I think there is has to be talks across the table, and that's how it needs to be done. Obviously, China has its incentives to do it, but I think this will increase.
This is going to increase. So when you say that this could be expanded into other sectors, which other sectors is China likely to target?
So I'll say pharma is very dependent on that, although we don't cover those kind of sectors. But pharma and fertilizer, I think it will increase there, where actually the dependency on China is huge. EV batteries, we've already seen that, but I think it'll go to pharma and other sectors also. I think that's going to be very challenging for some of the other industries also. And we have to mind, it's not only about Apple. If this increases within the electronics also, a lot of components, even at the lower average selling price or the other categories in electronics, they still come from China. So I think, even if it's not from a skill set point of view or the engineer's point of view, a lot of curbs can come in terms of imports from China for these components also. So we have to be ready for that, for those discussions also.
Yes. Right. So how can the industry brace for these disruptions, Navkinder, particularly the electronics industry?
See, the hard truth is we are very dependent on China. Even we are assembling the iPhones in India, but a lot of components wide distributed in LG and Japan and Korea and other places. A lot of things are manufactured in these countries. They go to China, then get packaged and come here, and then we finally assemble it and package it. Dependency on China is a hard truth which the world is facing right now, which is why I said that.
Yes.
Which is why I said that a de-risking is.
And Navkinder, that's essentially what India is also trying to do. Yeah.
So
is the need of the hour. De-risking is the need of the hour. But let me also focus.
Yeah, sorry, go on.
Okay, so let me ask you another question, Navkinder. This is essentially about, Chinese doublespeak, because on the one hand, the Chinese speak of fostering a dialogue with India and, of course, increasing cooperation and collaboration. But then you employ these economic measures. You've seen several high-level visits from India's side to China. And, of course, very recently, a Chinese executive from their government was visiting India as well. So that essentially is Chinese doublespeak when it talks about normalizing ties with India.
Absolutely. I would agree with that. Sitting in India, obviously, it's a, doublespeak. From Chinese point of view, to see 2019 and 20, when we had TikTok ban and all the apps were banned, that was a response to Gilwan Valley and everything else. So we have also done some of the actions, and this is also a response. Obviously, China knows that, where the juggler is. And if the dependency on China is so much, China is, we can say doublespeak. Obviously, these are geopolitics. I wouldn't have any intelligent comments on how geopolitics work. But yes, I agree with you that China, obviously, these are part of the diplomatic relations which happen. So we have to find a middle ground probably here.
Okay. So when you talk about, an immediate solution, for example, Navkinder, if I give an example from the EV segment, India is looking at, a subsidy scheme, a PLI scheme. It could take the shape of a PLI scheme for the EV segment. We are also looking at sourcing rare earths from alternate geographies across the world to reduce our dependence on China. But what can the electronics ecosystem do in the near term and, of course, in the medium term?
See, in the near term, Apple already has, some of the capacity already here. So the near term, what Apple and India probably can agree on that is that we might not be able to expand. And, in the meanwhile, and the parallel, the talks between Foxconn, China, and happen. Obviously, the reports say that China has not officially told Foxconn. It has been, given as a signal or, not a diktat. So, immediate term is we see that the expansion of the scale of production of these high-tech manufacturing cannot happen probably here. And parallelly, we start developing the infrastructure and we go back to the drawing board, how China did about 20 years back. Aggressive, policy making in terms of how PLI has been done, but a lot of state level, a lot of provincial level stuff, and a lot of skilling needs to be done here, which is how Apple has been successful and China has been dependent on Apple and Apple has been dependent. There's no short-term solutions to this, obviously. Everybody will, try to find a short-term solution. That's not. Short-term solution is you sit at the capacity which is there and expand the capacity in a meaningful manner rather than only, getting the assembly. We have to start making high-tech components here, and that will take time.
Okay. Right. But surely, Navkinder, Foxconn would be looking at alternatives, right? So what possible alternatives do you think it is currently looking at? And of course, will Taiwan be used in for bringing in experts, these skilled experts?
Oh, absolutely. Some of the other geographies, they can be done. Some of how the expansion has been done in, Tata's and Pegatron also, that can also be done. So Foxconn can work with the government of India and say that we can expand the capacity, taking the expertise from other also. So these kind of things will be done. We don't have much information right now how Foxconn is thinking or replying to this. We've not been able to get in touch with them. As soon as we get something, we'll obviously share.
Okay. Navkinder, now, when we speak about India's components manufacturing ecosystem or overall manufacturing ecosystem, we've seen several kinds of schemes that the government has floated, whether it's related to PLI in IT, PLI IT hardware, the mobile PLI for smartphones manufacturing as well. And of course, now the component scheme that has been announced. I want to understand from you what more needs to be done to sort of build on this momentum that's been felt in the electronics ecosystem, given the fact that it's been one of the topmost categories, even when we speak about exports.
Oh, absolutely. The only way to, from here is go up. Now, what needs to be done is that while we create the product here, the value addition to the product which happens here has to increase. So right now, let's say if it happens about 10, 15, 20% to an iPhone, it has to go to about 30, 35%, right? So how does it happen? You start making higher value components here. What needs to be done for that? You bring in the suppliers, and not only on iPhone. I'm saying, overall electronics. You start making cases and chassis and chargers and others. Start making other high-value components. Obviously, the two most high-value components are displays, which are already being manufactured here, and for iPhone also, some of these component players are thinking. But it's already happening in TVs and some of the other categories. So the only way to go up logically here is how do you increase the value addition which happens from India? Right now, or probably a year back, it was mostly assembly in India. Right now, we're trying to have more value addition so that it starts meaningfully make in India. It reaches about 35-50% kind of in next 5 to 7 years. I think that's a great journey we have traveled if that happens. So I think higher value components need to be produced here in India so that they can be produced and assembled and exported from it.
Okay, just one final question before we let you go, and this is essentially about the fact that, these moves that China is undertaking. Of course, there is pressure on supply chains. Of course, a deal that China was trying to strike with the United States, there was some disruption. Both countries had a fallout over that deal, and of course, both countries and their chiefs once again negotiated at least an interim trade deal. How long do you think these disruptions are going to be, and how will this really impact how smartphone companies or electronics companies really move with respect to their plans?
So the easy answer to this is till the time the administration of USA is in power there, because one of the things, the tariffs are not the tariffs. The tariff is the inconsistency.
That's for the next 3 years,
right? So the real punishment is not the tariffs. The real punishment is the inconsistency of the policy making, right? So today we have something else, tomorrow we have something else, and in 9th or 10th July is where the 90 days end. So we don't know what's happening on the 10th July. Will it be extended indefinitely? I think that inconsistency is there. But if some of the observers have said that, and we partly agree, that for example, if we take a case of iPhone getting produced in USA, now not $2,000 or $3,500, nobody can reach a figure because it cannot be produced there. I mean, that's a final argument. But let's say Apple would be much better paying those tariffs and fine and increasing the cost of the iPhones in USA rather than trying to set up a factory there. So it's very difficult to answer this question that, what's the way forward? As long as this policy inconsistency remains, the companies will be in a flux. They will try to rejig their value chain, supply chain. And the rejigging of the supply chain is also not a few months or a few year kind of thing. When you rejig the supply chain, it's for 5 to 10 years, right? So it's not a short-term kind of thing. Very difficult to answer this question as of now.
Right, and we'll have to see how that, a tariff conversation really plays out as far as India is concerned. But at the moment, there is disruption. Of course, brands are anticipating what the Trump administration is going to do. But we do have another challenge, which is essentially coming in from China. Thank you very much on that note, Navkendra, for joining us here on ET Now and sharing your perspectives. Ladies and gentlemen,